You may notice something about fantasy books. Most of them are huge. If you've ever looked at a 14-book series and thought, yeah, I'll start that someday, you're not alone. I mean, you can only read so much in your lifetime, but what if I told you you don't need to dedicate a decade of your life to get the full, mind-blowing experience that fantasy can offer? And don't get me wrong, I love sprawling, slow burn, epic fantasy sagas, but sometimes you just need a break from that. Some books pack that same depth and emotional devastation of a massive series into just one novel. It's kind of a miracle, to be honest. Today I'm talking about my top 10 favorite fantasy standalone books, at least as of 2025. I'll probably make a video next year updating the list to see if anything changes. And by the way, if you're in a reading slump, sometimes a standalone can really help because it doesn't have a huge commitment to it and you don't feel as overwhelmed reading a standalone book. And speaking of feeling overwhelmed, there's nothing worse than picking up a book you've been dying to read only to find that your brain isn't really cooperating with you. You start one paragraph, then you just can't focus. Next thing you know, you're doom scrolling on your phone. We've all kind of been there. We've been stressed out and unfocused. And one thing I noticed is that when I drink a lot of coffee, I tend to get a lot of jitters and anxiety. And typically I drink a lot of coffee when I'm working on these videos and when I'm trying to get through the never-ending TBR pile. And something that's been helping me a lot to not get those jitters and to not feel anxious is MagicMind. And I started off with their 14-day mental wealth challenge, which is all about investing in long-term mental clarity and focus, not just looking for quick fixes. MagicMind is a small daily shot designed to support cognitive performance, reduce stress, and help keep your energy levels steady without the crash that comes from drinking too much coffee, which is exactly what I needed. It actually has ashwagandha in it, which is something that is clinically proven to help reduce stress and anxiety and help improve your sleep. And ashwagandha is something I've taken off and on throughout the years separately, and I've noticed big improvements from it, so I was really happy to see that it's in this bottle. There's 12 ingredients in here that all have 200 studies behind them to back them up. I've now been drinking MagicMind for months. It's become part of my daily routine alongside my morning coffee, and I have definitely noticed that I don't get those jitters anymore, I don't feel as anxious, and I don't get that caffeine burnout. There's no better time to invest in your mental wealth, so if you want to try it for yourself, you can get 20% off a one-time purchase or 48% off if you subscribe using my link in the description, or just scan the QR code up above and use the code CAPTURED20 at checkout. Huge thank you to MagicMind for sponsoring the video. Now let's get onto the list because these are books you need to read. First up, we have a book that is criminally underrated, in my opinion. That is City of Bones by Martha Wells. Martha Wells, of course, is most well known for her Murderbot series. But guys, you need to check out her backlog because she has written a lot of great novels. And this one was written back in 1995. This is actually an older edition of City of Bones. They made a revised edition that just came out in 2023. This is an ARC copy. This is probably the best way to read City of Bones. It's also the most accessible way to read it. So yeah, there's new versions in print. You guys should check it out because this book is very, very unique. The story is set in a multi-tiered monolith of a city called Charisat, which sits on the edge of this vast desert wasteland known as the Waste. And we follow a man named Kot, who is a Chrisman, which is a bioengineered human that was created by the ancients in order to survive the Waste. And along with a human named Sagai, the two are relic dealers working in the bottom tiers of society, trying to stay one step ahead of the trade inspectors. Kot navigates the city's shadowy underworld, scavenging lost artifacts while trying to avoid the oppressive laws of Charisat's ruling class. And when he's hired by the powerful Warders, a secret group of magic wielders, to recover an ancient relic said to be one of the Ancient's arcane engines, he's drawn into a conspiracy that could reshape the world. This book is a blend of post-apocalyptic adventure, a political intrigue, and some really unique and interesting world building. I will say it took me a little while to get invested in this one. It might be the same case for you, but once I finally got into the flow of the story and Martha Wells' writing style finally kind of clicked for me, then this was a hard book to put down. It is so unique, and again, I feel like this book deserves a lot more attention than it got. I actually picked up this older copy in a used bookstore like years and years ago, before there was ever news of a reprint, and to me, just reading the back of it, it sounded so interesting. I knew I had to read it. The city of Charisat is so interesting. This is a world where water is like a delicacy. The poor have to pay for every drop of it, while the rich show off their wealth with opulent waste. And here we also have enough remnants of like super science technology that really makes this kind of a science fantasy book. And that's something I always like to see. I love when sci-fi and fantasy kind of get blended together. The characters are also a highlight. They're complex, they're fun to read. There's actually a surprising amount of like humor in this book. I found the dialogue to be one of the best parts for me. There isn't really a whole lot of romance in this book, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what type of reader you are. But if you love unique fantasy worlds, intelligent protagonists, and stories about forgotten civilizations, City of Bones is a must-read. And I'm not talking about City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This is City of Bones by Martha Wells. Don't get them mixed up. I kind of feel like I've talked about the Sword of Kaigen a lot on the channel recently, but that's for good reason. This is a book that just emotionally devastates you. It's intense, man, and it's also a very beautiful story and a wonderful standalone that I recommend to everyone. This is a Japanese-inspired military fantasy that primarily focuses on two characters. We follow Mamoru Matsuda, a 14-year-old boy raised in the rigid traditional warrior culture of the Kaigenese Empire. Trained from birth to wield his family's legendary ice magic, Mamoru believes in his duty to protect his homeland. But then, when a new student arrives at his academy and challenges the truths that he's been taught, Mamoru begins to question everything, his beliefs, his country, and even his own family. Now, we also follow Misaki Matsuda, Mamoru's mother, and she's a woman who's abandoned her past as a warrior in order to become the obedient wife of a cold, distant husband. But as war looms over Kaigen, Misaki must confront the truth. The past never truly stays buried, and she may have to become the warrior that she once was to protect the ones that she loves. Mamoru is discovering the world while Misaki is rediscovering herself. He's desperate to prove himself as a warrior, and she has spent years trying to suppress that very part of her identity. The Kaigenese Empire, with all its propaganda and political intrigue, is very layered and interesting, and this book just has such a fresh and unique flavor to it. Again, be prepared to feel emotions, because this focuses heavily on loss, trauma, grief, and healing, and it's so worth the read. Blood Over Bright Haven is another great standalone by ML Wong. I do feel like this one it's not really that subtle with its theming. It kind of pounds you over the head with it, but I still did really enjoy this book as well. This is totally different though. It's like a dark academia. This one didn't make the list, but I thought I would mention it anyway. If you are looking for a book that will melt your brain, then The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, that is here to do just that. This is a blend of horror and dark fantasy and cosmic weirdness and kind of a bit of absurdist humor in there as well. It's such a weird book. It's one of the weirdest books I have read, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's violent, it's bizarre, and it's definitely not going to hold your hand as you kind of stumble your way through the chapters in complete bewilderment, but if you stick with it, it is going to pay off. It's one of the most unforgettable books that I've read. The book follows Caroline, one of a dozen people who were adopted by a man they learned to call father, and this man kind of swept them away from their regular American lives and brought them to an infinite library to teach them his ancient, brutal ways. And we don't really know much about this figure. He's disappeared right at the beginning of the book. All we know is that he's kidnapped 12 children and made them believe that he's God. And oh boy, these children, they have been torn to pieces, they have been killed and resurrected until they've lost everything that gives them a normal human experience. They have gone through so much trauma, and it's very hard to even describe this book. Like I said, some of these characters have literally died and been resurrected, and it's complete chaos. Alongside Caroline, there's a tutu-wearing psychopath.
What?
There's a talking lion who ends up being one of the best characters in the book. There's a stoner healer, and this book kind of functions like a puzzle box, so readers are going to be rewarded for paying close attention and trying to figure out what's going on. We get some messed up flashbacks trying to piece together Caroline's life, and it's very crazy. I don't even know how to describe this book in the best way. I don't know if I'm doing a good job, but I feel like this is a book where you don't want to know too much about it going into it. So what I've described here is basically what you just kind of get in the synopsis, and it's even then, it's hard to wrap your mind around. The book balances those deeply unsettling moments with some, like, outright hilarious ones in a way that seems like it shouldn't work, but it absolutely does. But let's address the elephant or the lion in the room here. This book is not for the faint of heart. It's brutal, it's violent, there's a lot of psychological and physical abuse going on in this book. If you're squeamish in any way when it comes to, you know, violence against animals or children or anything like that, this is a fair warning here. This book does contain that stuff. And at times I did have a hard time reading some of this, but if you do brave that darkness, the library at Mount Char offers one of the most original and mind-bending stories that I've read. It's a fantastic standalone book. And man, this book it can take you to some deep, dark, terrible places, but it doesn't abandon you there. It could kind of be like a fever dream at times, where you don't exactly know what's going on, but it's impossible to look away. If any of that sounds interesting to you, make sure to go check it out. I'll have a link in the description. Now, for this next one, I knew I wanted to include some Brandon Sanderson standalone on this list, and it was very, very hard for me to narrow it down. I was originally gonna go with Warbreaker, then I thought about Elantris, then I thought about the Emperor's Soul, and then just when I settled on Tress of the Emerald Sea, I backtracked and I went to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. So that's what we're gonna talk about. The reason I went with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, even though there's a few things that kind of just annoyed me in this book, I do feel like it had a much stronger ending than Tress of the Emerald Sea. I don't know if it's recency bias that I'm deciding to talk about this one and not Warbreaker. It has been a while since I've read Warbreaker, but Yumi and the Nightmare Painter was just such a unique and fun story. I also thought it was really great just to get Sanderson attempting to write a bit more romance than he usually does. I still think the romance was fairly light in this book, but it was a very sweet story, and it also just went in some directions I wasn't really expecting. I absolutely love this hardcover edition. I love the artwork inside and the end papers. If for some reason you don't know about Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, basically Yumi and Painter end up swapping lives. They go to sleep and they wake up in the other person's body, and they're experiencing their life and their world, and it kind of goes back and forth for a while. That's all I really need to say to explain this book, but it ends up having so many twists and turns along the way, and I will say this book is kind of anime-esque, and that could be a negative for some people and a positive for others. I love anime. The ending to this book was a huge highlight, and I highly recommend checking out Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. 6. Now for this next one, imagine if Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, and Neil Gaiman all got together to write a fantasy novel. That would be Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. And this is actually the beautiful new edition that I absolutely love. Huge thank you to one of my patrons for sending this to me. I really like this new edition. This is an 846-page literary beast that is filled with magic and politics and footnotes longer than some novellas, and the driest wit this side of the 19th century. This is a fantasy novel that feels more like a historical fiction first, fantasy novel second, and a social satire third, all wrapped up in a style that is so convincingly Victorian that by the time you end up finishing this, you're probably going to be brewing a cup of tea and calling people gentle readers. And that's not to say the book feels archaic or outdated. The writing style is actually very easy to get into and to just fall into, and it can actually be kind of addictive at times. It's hard to put down. If you don't know, this novel is set in an alternate 19th century England during the Napoleonic Wars, in a world where magic does actually exist, it just hasn't been practiced by anybody in centuries. And that's where Mr. Norrell enters the scene. Strange, a reckless, charismatic gentleman who has a taste for adventure, chaos, and dangerous dealings with fairies. And that's where the fun begins. Now, this is a very immersive and well-researched book. Clarke, I really loved reading the footnotes in this one because Clarke really, she's invented this convincing folklore and mythology and magical text and historical figures. It all just feels so real. And while this book does have the density of a classic, it's also frequently hilarious as well. It has this dry humor, often poking fun at the absurdity of high society and bureaucracy, and the very English habit of remaining polite in the face of just utter madness. There's a society of theoretical magicians who spend their time discussing magic, but would never dream of actually practicing it because that would be unseemly. The book is frequently funny, and it also just has this weirdness to it that I really love. At its core, this is a story about two magicians and their clashing ideologies. Mr. Norrell believes magic should be controlled and respectable and only used in the service of the British government, while Jonathan Strange wants to discover the more wild, untamed magic of the past, especially that related to the Raven King, a shadowy mythical figure that once ruled over northern England. I'll admit, this book isn't for everyone. If you can handle slow burn pacing and Austean prose, then you're going to be rewarded though with one of the most richly detailed and unique fantasy novels I've read. And that's why it deserves a spot on this list. Now, we do have a problem here. I made a rule before making this video that I'm only going to include one book per author, so this next book didn't actually make it on the list, okay? It didn't actually make it, but it's a bonus book. Everybody loves a bonus, so I'm sure you guys aren't gonna complain that I'm breaking the rules a little bit. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I didn't know which one to include, if I'm being honest, because I love both of these dearly. I do think that Jonathan Strange is just a little bit stronger of a book. This has a lot more to offer, but I do love Piranesi as well. This is such a wonderful, strange novel, and I would say it's already like a modern classic. It's a very short novel, so just go and read this book. It's one of my favorites, even though I did find like the twist at the ending to be pretty predictable, but it's still just one of the strangest, oddest books I've read, and I love it. And if you enjoy kind of uncanny atmospheres and magical realism, then you're probably going to enjoy this book. That was just a bonus. I didn't break any rules, okay? Moving on. Best Served Cold is Joe Abercrombie at his best. This is the first standalone of a set of 3 standalones that take place after the First Law trilogy. So you do benefit from having read the First Law trilogy, but you could read this just on its own as well. It is a fully contained story. And for context, this takes place 2 years after the events of the Last Argument of Kings. At its core, Best Served Cold is a simple revenge story. A mercenary general, Monza Mercado, is betrayed, her brother is murdered, and she herself is left for dead. But Monza doesn't stay dead. She survives just barely and emerges with one thing on her mind: vengeance. 7 names, 7 deaths. And this is all a recipe for a journey that is drenched in carnage and political scheming and Abercrombie's clever wit. This is Lord Grimdark's version of Kill Bill. And on that, this is actually a very cinematic novel. So many moments in this book I feel like I'm seeing as a movie. Like, I could totally see this being adapted at some point, and I hope it does get adapted. There's so many brutal moments, so many twists and turns. I feel like it could work really well on the big screen. We're just lucky that it also works really well as a standalone novel. If you have read the First Law trilogy, then you probably know that Abercrombie's humor always kind of sneaks up on you. One second you're reading this like brutal execution, and then next there's a sharp one-liner that makes you laugh. Nikimo Koska, for example, the alcoholic, washed-up mercenary, never misses a chance to steal the scene with his drunken bravado. He is one of the best characters that Abercrombie has written. And I do feel like this is one of Abercrombie's best books. At the same time, I still missed the cast from the original trilogy. I mean, you can't really beat Glokta and Logan Nine Fingers. But I did enjoy the new cast here. It kind of feels like an evil version of the classic Fellowship. Call Shivers was a standout in this book. Now, Monza is a character you don't exactly like. She is cold and ruthless, and she's not really a hero. She's a product of this world. She's a killer and a schemer, a force of nature that will burn everything in her path to get what she wants. But all the choices she makes, all the people sacrificed, and betrayals that she enacts, all of it comes back around. And when it does, it hurts. Sure, Monza cuts her way through her enemies, but with every death, she kind of loses a piece of herself as well. With every betrayal, she becomes more like the people that she's hunting. And for all of its violence, Best Served Cold isn't about the killing, it's about what revenge does to you. If that sounds interesting to you at all, if you're a fan of grimdark fantasy, you've probably already read this. But if you haven't, you need to read Best Served Cold. Again, I do have affiliate links in the description. Using those helps out the channel, so thank you guys so much. We need to talk about Guy Gavriel Kay because he is perhaps the best standalone fantasy writer. Whether it's Tigana, A Brightness Long Ago, Under Heaven, The Lions of Al-Rassan, there are so many incredible books. All of them are top-notch, and Guy Gavriel Kay is an author I am so surprised isn't really talked about that much on YouTube. I don't understand why. He's an author, I've heard it be said that he is your favorite author's favorite author, and that he's an author that writers really love to read. And I can see that. I'm currently writing my first book. It's the first book of a trilogy, and reading Guy Gavriel Kay just inspires me to write. Even if I'm never gonna be half as good of a writer as he is, something about his books just inspire me to work harder at my writing, to become a better writer. He has such beautiful prose, and that's why it doesn't really matter which standalone novel I choose of his to put on this list, but I am going to go with the Lions of Al-Rassan. This is my favorite standalone that I've read by him. I still haven't read all of his standalones, so as of right now, this is my favorite. I'll get back, I'll update you guys once I read more by him. This one is a high recommendation from me. I do think it's not going to be for everyone though. There's a lot of philosophical depth there. There's a lot of mature drama, and I just think it's just such a breathtaking book. If it is something that sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend just giving it a try. It does take a while to kind of become invested. For me, it took a while to get invested in the characters, but then I hit a point where the characters just felt so realistic to me. They're some of the most realistic characters I've read, and I just couldn't put the book down after that. And at number 3, we have a book that has haunted me. This is a book about faith and damnation, about redemption and despair. It's about a world on the brink of apocalypse that's ravaged by disease and war. And if that all weren't enough, it also has an all-out war between heaven and hell. It is grotesque, it is poetic, and in my opinion, it's one of the most underrated standalone books of modern fantasy. I am, of course, talking about Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. This is a historical fantasy horror novel that is set in the 14th century France during Black Death. To set the backdrop of this novel, basically, Lucifer and his minions begin to suspect that God isn't watching over humanity anymore, so they decide to test their hypothesis by, introducing a little bit of war, a little bit of famine. The results seem promising, so then in 1348, they unleash the bubonic plague. People start dying, society crumbles, chaos ensues, and then the demons decide to start an all-out war on heaven, because as far as they can tell, nobody's really paying attention up there. That's like the epic scale drama in the background, but we actually follow a much more human story down below. Enter Thomas de Givras. Once a knight, now a broken man, excommunicated and wandering the ruined land. And Thomas is many things. He's disillusioned, violent, deeply flawed, but he's not beyond saving. And that's where Delphine comes into the picture. Delphine is a child, alone and helpless, or at least it seems that way when a group of 4 bandits find her after having already killed and eaten her donkey. But we can kind of tell, like, the moment that Thomas meets her, that there's something off about this character. She speaks with this eerie certainty, she claims to talk to angels, and she kind of knows what's going on. And she absolutely insists that Thomas must take her to Avignon, where she can fulfill a purpose that she doesn't even really know. Is she divinely chosen? Is she mad? Is she playing a long con on a broken man who can't tell? It almost doesn't matter because Thomas ends up agreeing, and so begins their journey across this ruined landscape of France. This isn't a peaceful France. This is more like a diseased lung. It's a ruined landscape, and it's filled with brigands just trying to survive, and people that are so hungry they would kill another human. Not to mention the more supernatural dangers. There's also monsters and the Walking Dead. It's a pretty terrifying place to exist. And Buehlman has a knack for creating disturbing imagery, the kind that worms its way into your mind and you can't stop thinking about it for days. This book can be pretty terrifying at times, but that's not to say it's all doom and gloom either. There's actually a lot of hope in this novel, something that kind of surprised me at first. And there's also humor. That's right, there's a lot of humor in this book. Not only is Buehlman's prose very evocative and beautiful, but the dialogue is very funny. And Between Two Fires actually had some truly laugh out loud moments in it at times. It kind of reminds me of the manga Berserk. If you like Berserk, I think you would probably like this book as well. Or if you like any FromSoft games like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, I feel like you should probably read Between Two Fires. It's kind of similar. It's gritty, it can be terrifying, but there's also some lighthearted moments, and there's some moments of hope as well. And again, this book is very underrated. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than The Black-Tongued Thief and The Daughter's War by Christopher Buehlman. So if it sounds interesting to you at all, I highly recommend using the link in the description and buying this book because it is such a great read. Next up, Patricia A. McKillip's The Forgotten Beasts of Eld. This is a work of art. It's lyrical, it's haunting, and it's timeless. I feel like not many modern readers are reading this one though, but they should be. This is such a great book. And at first glance, The Forgotten Beasts of Eld feels a little bit like a fairy tale. A powerful young sorceress, Sybil, lives high on Eld Mountain, alone except for her menagerie of magical beasts. She doesn't need companionship, nor does she want it. Her animals, intelligent, wise, and filled with riddles, are enough. She's distant, ethereal, and content to exist apart from the world of men. But then a knight arrives at her gates, bearing an infant, a child whose very existence ties her to the tangled, violent world below. And from that moment on, Sybil is forced to confront something far more dangerous than magic or war: human emotion. This doesn't have any grand battles, it doesn't have some epic quest. This is a deeply personal story about love and revenge and the things that ties them together. And to talk about this book, we need to talk about the writing. Patricia A. McKillop is one of those authors where I feel like each sentence matters and each sentence is where it should be. This book is the exact length it needs to be. It doesn't need to be any longer. It perfectly tells the tale. Each sentence is crafted like a jewel and polished to perfection. And there's kind of this rhythmic, hypnotic quality to the writing. It feels very lyrical and beautiful. And I feel like this is an author that understands fantasy, like true fantasy. The type of fantasy that's about immersing you in a world that feels otherworldly and ethereal, but also real at the same time. And reading this book kind of feels like you're stepping into a dream, and I really love that quality of it. It's something you don't see that often, especially in modern fantasy. And Sybil is a very interesting character. She's very powerful and self-contained. She doesn't need anything else but her magical creatures, but she's also very cold. And we kind of follow this journey of her becoming human and learning to feel, learning to love, and learning to hate and feel pain. And that's something that you don't really read in fantasy. I haven't really read a story that kind of follows that path. I could go on for hours about how The Forgotten Beasts of Eld is one of the most beautifully written books, but you should just go read it for yourself. If you think that fantasy is best when it feels like a legend that's whispered on the wind, then you need this book in your life. Before moving on to the #1 spot, we do have some honorable mentions. The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. This is one of my favorite standalones. It was very hard for me to not put this on the list. The thing is that it's not exactly a standalone anymore because she has written more books that take place in the same world. Personally, I do think it is still a standalone. I've heard a lot of people arguing it's not online. It's still a standalone, guys, but I didn't put it on this list. It is one of my favorites, though, and it is a very unique book. It's kind of like a, what do you call it? A fantasy of manners? The Princess Bride by William Goldman. This one also gets an honorable mention. I love The Princess Bride, huge fan of the movie. I actually really enjoy the book as well, and there's a few parts in the book I really wish were included in the movie. But when it comes down to it, I'm probably more likely to just go back and watch the movie than I am to reread the book. It's still a wonderful story, though, and if you are a fan of the movie and you never read the book, I do think you should give the book a read at some point. Also getting a mention is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. This is a story that feels like a classic, but also timeless. It has this kind of lyrical, dreamlike quality to it. If you've read anything by Peter S. Beagle, you should know what I'm talking about. He writes very whimsical fantasy, and this is a classic for a reason. It follows a lone unicorn who embarks on a journey to discover the fate of her kind. Along the way, she gathers an unlikely band of companions, a bumbling magician, a world-weary woman, and a prince who's searching for heroism, all while facing the dark magic of the Red Bull. I actually grew up with the adaptation. I loved that movie, I still do, and I didn't read the novel until much later on, but I'm really glad I did. If you've never read this book, I would say it's a must-read. It's one of the greatest fantasy novels of all time. I'm also gonna mention The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This one, if I'm being honest, this isn't anywhere close to my top 10. I just want to mention it because I know a lot of you guys in the comments have recommended this book to me, so I just want to give you my opinion on it. I thought this book overall was just fine. I think it's one of those cases where this book was just very hyped up online. Then I read it and I thought it was just okay. It it was an okay book. It's not really anything I'm going to think about that much. Circe by Madeline Miller is actually much better. I'd recommend that one. Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik also gets an honorable mention. This book just throws you into this ruthless, endless winter, and you feel the chill in your bones. This is such an atmospheric read. It also feels very much like a Grimm's fairy tale, but kind of like fresh. It feels like a modern classic, and I think it's the perfect book to read during the winter if you want to feel more cold for some reason. It's very atmospheric, very mysterious, and like I said, it feels like a modern day fairy tale. Highly recommend Spinning Silver. Now, moving on to the number 1 spot, and that of course goes to The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. There is a reason why this means so much to so many people, and for me personally, this book means a lot. It's one of the first books that really got me into fantasy. I actually got this as a present. I don't remember which birthday it was now. Maybe I was 13. I don't remember, but I got this as a present, and I read it and I reread it. It's been a while now since I've read The Hobbit, but I know it stands the test of time. It's obviously one of the most beloved novels for a reason, and in my opinion, it's the perfect place to begin your adventures in Middle-earth. I feel like it's a better introduction than The Lord of the Rings, and it's also a book that is perfect for those of any age. As a child, it's a thrilling adventure filled with danger and discovery, and as an adult, it's a beautifully crafted tale about stepping outside of one's comfort zone, the nature of heroism, and the power of small, unexpected bravery. It's a cozy, whimsical adventure that is endlessly rereadable, and that is why The Hobbit is in my number 1 spot. But let me know your favorite standalone fantasy books. Are there some books that I should have included in my list? Let me know in the comments, and maybe they'll make it onto next year's list. There's so many standalones I still would like to read, so I'm always up for recommendations. As always, I do have affiliate links in the description. Using those actually helps out the channel a lot, guys. So I really appreciate it. And also, if you enjoy the videos I'm making, if you want to help support the channel in some way, then the best way to do that is to support the channel over on Ko-fi. On Ko-fi, 100% of the donations go to the creator, but if you want some extra bonuses, then you can also check out my Patreon or become a channel member. Huge thank you to my top supporters, and I'll see you guys with a new video soon.